See, turn to your Bibles, if you have it, to Mark chapter 1, the second book in the New Testament. Matthew, Mark, Luke. If you hit Luke, you've gone too far. Mark chapter 1, start at verse 35. I think the words are on the screen. You go ahead and throw this up there. I'm going to dive right in. Start at verse 35. It says this. It says, very early in the morning. Man, that's a tough phrase. Like we could just spend a lot of time talking about that. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, even harder. I think they had daylight savings time back then, I'm not sure. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he got up, went out, and made his way to a deserted place. This is talking about Jesus. And there he was praying. Simon and his companions searched for him, and when they found him, they said, everyone is looking for you. And he said to them, let's go on to the neighboring villages, so that I may preach there too. This is why I have come. So we're going to look at a few things about this passage of Scripture here. When I was a kid, I grew up in Tennessee. I kind of lived in a couple different cities in the state. But no matter where we lived, every year we would come to Pennsylvania for our summer vacation. Every single summer, this is where we spent our summer. Both my parents were born and raised in this area, and the majority of my extended family, even to this day, still lives here. And so every year we came home for a visit. And every year my parents would prepare for our journey. They would prepare for our trips. I'm sure if you go on a trip or if you've been on a trip with your parents, you've prepared for it in some way or another. My mom would make snacks, like special. She made like this trail mix before trail mix was cool. Like she would make a trail mix. I liked it because it had M&Ms in it. And I always got yelled out for eating out the M&Ms, But Maddie's giving me the eye because I yell at my kids now for just eating out the M&Ms. Like, it's a handful or nothing. Leave it alone because we still make it when we go on a trip. She'd pack a lunch to travel with because we'd always stop at like the rest areas to save money to eat a lunch. She would take my sister and I to the store so we could pick out a new coloring book and a new pack of crayons. To help keep us from driving them insane on a 8-9 hour trip between East Tennessee and here, or sometimes longer. And sometimes she let us buy like a little game. My dad would always make sure that the car was in tip-top shape. He'd take it, get the oil changed, get the tune up, make sure all the tires are inflated. And then there's one other thing that they would always do. Every year for weeks leading up to our trip, I would hear my parents talking about something called a triptych. Does anyone know what a triptych is? I am really aging. Yeah, see, this is not a thing that you need anymore. I'm going to explain it to you. I would hear things like, did you order the triptych? We have to go get the triptych. I got to pick the triptych up today. Let's go over the triptych before we leave. This was the big thing around our trip. And so here's what a triptych is. Everyone's familiar with AAA, right? Like it's an auto club you can join, and if your car breaks down, you get a free tow, right? And they have other travel services, and you can even get car insurance, I think, through them now. But back in the day, before home computers were a thing, like when you're ancient like I am, and they didn't have GPS unless you're in the military, and you didn't have a smartphone, you had to use maps, right? Like you had to take out a map, and you could go to AAA, and you could say, hey, I am leaving from this address, and I'm going to that address, and they would basically Waze your trip for you in a paper form. So you wouldn't have this whole map where you had to look. It'd be a flip map, and it'd be just like looking at your GPS now. It has a little line, and you just kind of go up that line. That's exactly what the triptych did. They turned it into a north to south route, no matter which direction you're going, and it mapped out your whole route for you. It had all the exit numbers. It had where all the rest stops were. It had where restaurants were along the way. It even had where construction might be present at the time. And so this was like the coolest thing in the world. And so we always had to plan our trip. Does this amaze anyone else besides me? It was pretty. We've actually used one since we're married. I think you might still be able to order a triptych, as weird as it sounds. We'll have to try it. Maybe we'll just make up a trip just to see what happens. And it was free if you're a AAA member. So they always did all this. And my parents had to prepare their journey internally before they could take it. They had to get all their stuff together before they could move out of the driveway. They had to know where they were going, they had to know how to get there, and they had to know why they were going there, right? And so there was all these things. And so the first point I want to look at about this is that Jesus took a journey inward. He had to prepare for his journey. Jesus was at the beginning of his mission, and he needed to inwardly prepare for the journey ahead. And like my parents went to AAA to get the triptych, the little map thing that they had coupons in there. It was great, man. Like little things that you could do for fun along the way, which we never got to do. But I'll talk more about that later. But like Jesus had to go to the Father to get his roadmap, to get his marching orders. He had to know why he was here on earth. He had to know what he was doing, and he had to know how he was going to get there. And Jesus told us time and time again that he only does what he sees the Father doing. And so too many of us right now are just wandering around without a map, without a plan, or even a destination. We just get up and aimlessly walk through another day of life. If I asked you at the end of a Monday, of a typical Monday, why you did what you did during the day, what would your answer be? Like tomorrow, at the end of work, right before you go to bed, if I called you up and said, hey, why did you do what you did today? What would the answer be? If I asked you on a typical Friday at 5 o'clock, when you're done with, they don't have, whistles don't blow anymore for work, but you know what I mean. But when the whistle blows, what you did on Friday, why you did what you did over the past week, what would your answer be? I think for a lot of us, we'd probably really have trouble finding an answer. I mean, maybe it's like, well, I got to pay the bills, right? I mean, that's probably the easiest one. I got to pay the bills. I have to go to work, right? The problem is, most of us don't follow Jesus' example and look to the Father for our direction and for our purpose. God has created us to be on a journey, but we mostly just wander around with no real sense of purpose in our life. It's just another day, and it's just another day, and we're wandering aimlessly around. In fact, we're in a season of kind of doing this inward, looking inward right now as a church. Right now, I'm walking through with our Synergy team about a 6 to 8 month process of being introspective about Watershed. We're seeking God. We're searching for our unique gifting as a church. And we're getting marching orders for the mission of Watershed Church. And we know that we want to love God and love others and make disciples. Every church wants to do that. If they're a decent church, every church should want to do that. Like, that should be a non-negotiable baseline. If you're a church, that's what you want to do. You want to love God, love others, make disciples, right? But the question is, how are we going to do that? In other words, what route does God want us to take to get to that point? Because there's a million different ways you can do that. And they're all great ways to do that. And this is what I've been having you answer survey questions periodically on Sunday mornings. Have you guys been in here when I've asked you some questions, like write down the answer for me real quick? This is why I've been doing that, so we can look introspectively and say, God, what have you created Watershed Church to do that 10,000 other churches couldn't do? Not because we want to feel special or great, but because we're all gathered together for a certain purpose. Like, God didn't pull all of us together just coincidentally. It wasn't just like, I just throw a little bit of Christy in there, throw a little bit of Alex in there, throw a little bit of Mike in there, throw a little bit of Susan in there, sprinkle a little Patty, in there. We'll see what comes out. We'll throw it in the oven, let it bake for a while. Hopefully it tastes all right. No, man. God chose each and every one of this room to be in this room for a reason. There's something unique that God wants to use Watershed Church for in Roxborough. And here's the thing. When we find what that is, when we look internally and get our marching orders from God and say, God, why did you bring us together? What's the unique gifts and talents and the things that we're passionate about? Then God is going to do a movement in Roxborough and Philadelphia, and I believe around the world, no matter how big we are, whether we're the people in this room or whether we fill this auditorium and have to have 3 services, it doesn't matter. God's going to do something amazing. And so that's what we're doing, and that's what Jesus was doing. Jesus slipped away. I mean, I preached on the same passage last year. We're talking about our prayer. What was the name of the prayer sermon? I don't know. It was some prayer sermon series. Talks with God. That's what it was, the Talks with God series. I talked about the same thing. We just talked about the emphasis of prayer, but man, Jesus was getting his marching orders from God. He said, man, I want to know, God, what you're up to, because I only want to be about what you're about. And as a church, I only want to be about what God's about in Roxborough with this group of people that we have in this room right now. But it all starts with us as individuals. Are we willing to go to God first and say, God, what do you want me to be about? You have me at my job. You have me with my family. You have me on the street where I live. And you have me at Watershed Church. What do you want me to be about in those contexts? What's that going to look like? And the funny thing is, when we start to find that, we can answer at the end of Monday, why did I do what I did today? We can answer on Friday, why did I do what I did all week long? And so Jesus took a journey inward. Second thing is this. Jesus fights distractions from his journey. Jesus fights distractions from his journey. Inevitably, during our drive from Tennessee to Pennsylvania every year, there would be obstacles and distractions from our trip. Mostly, they would come from my sister and I. I have two sisters. The one didn't come along until much later. I don't think she's a surprise to my parents. She's a surprise to my other sister and I, but she's there. She's awesome. Y'all met her. But inevitably, they would come from us from the back seat. You know, I'm hungry. I got to go potty. Can we stop there? Like, we would want to stop at a restaurant or an attraction. Like, between East Tennessee and Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, there's not a whole lot. Like, it's mostly mountains, but there's always caves and caverns. And to me, that's the coolest thing in the world. Like, can we stop at Luray Caverns? Can we stop at Endless Caverns? Can we go to Natural Bridge? What's over there? You know, and like, it was always a thing. At one point, we lived in North Carolina for a short thing, and I did talk my parents into stopping in Washington, D.C. at one point, and that was interesting. I can tell you that story later, but we always want to do that. My dad had 2 jobs on every family trip. These were his 2 jobs, and I'm proud to say that I try to maintain the same thing. My dad's 2 jobs were to drive and to say no. That was it. Like, nothing more, nothing less. His job was to drive and to say no. And my dad didn't say no because he was mean. I had a wonderful, loving father. He didn't say no before anything. He said no because we had a journey and we had a mission laid out that was worthy of our dedication. He knew that any distraction would ultimately lessen the impact of our mission. So if we stopped at Luray Caverns and spent 4 hours doing that, then we either had to spend money for a hotel, right, or we had to drive late into the night. And he knew that as having 2 young kids in the backseat of a car, making an 8-hour trip into a 15-hour trip is not a smart idea. That's miserable for everyone. And he also knew that if he spent money on the hotel, then that's less money he could spend once we got to our vacation on more fun stuff that we'd probably rather do. And he also knew that we would rather be visiting the family who we only get to see once a year than spending more time with just ourselves who we live with every single day. So he had this mission and he had what we were going to do, and he was not going to let anything distract from that. And here in this verse, Simon was trying to distract Jesus from his journey. Like a kid at the McDonald's play place, he wanted to stay just 5 more minutes. Like, can we just, you ever see a kid at the play place? Like, and the parents say it's time to go and they throw a fit, or can we just stay a little longer, or whatever, And so look at verse 36. Simon and his companions searched for him. And when they found him, they said, everyone is looking for you. Remember, last week, we talked about the fact that Jesus had all these people flocking to him. He was preaching the gospel. He was healing people with their sickness. He was driving out demons. And so, like I just got to tell you, I don't know if there might be a pastor out there somewhere. I'd like to meet him and shake his hand. But every pastor at some point dreams of this exact thing. Like, people are just flocking to your church, like there's droves of people. You become famous. Like, I know it's not right to desire that, but somewhere in the back of every pastor's mind, there's been a daydream at some point that you have this exact thing happen, where people are beating down your doors just wanting to hear you preach one more sermon. Just want to see you one more time. And they're all coming to Jesus, right? And some great things are happening, and people are singing your praises. Like, I know that's a very selfish, self-centered thing, but it's just the way it is. You ask any pastor, and if they're going to be truthful for you, they've all had that thought at some point. And so Jesus is at that point already in his ministry. His ministry just started, and he's like, man, things are popping. And Simon's like, hey, we got to go. People want you, your public wants you, I'm part of your posse, this is fun, let's go do this. And it doesn't seem like a bad request, right? Like, it's not wrong for these people to want, that's the whole point, is for people to want Jesus. And so Simon said, hey, people want you, they're looking for you, come pay attention. It's not a bad thing. In fact, it's actually a good thing. It's actually a really good thing that Simon's asking of Jesus. And on top of that, the request is coming from a trusted friend, right? Didn't Jesus go pick out Simon to be one of his followers? Didn't they hang out together? And so it comes from someone you think. That the problem is this. What Simon was asking of Jesus was a good thing, but it wasn't the best thing. The best thing is the thing that God told Jesus to do while Jesus was on his inward journey. That's the best thing. The best thing isn't what everyone else thinks that you ought to do necessarily. And we oftentimes sacrifice the best things on the altar of good things. And when we do, the good becomes the bad. Becomes the bad. You know, it's safe to say I don't like the turnpike. I hate paying tolls for roads because I feel like I pay taxes already, and to pay another toll is to pay another tax. And most people don't like taxes, especially me. Like I don't like that. It drives me nuts. So I will take 20 minutes extra on my drive to avoid the turnpike if I can, because I just don't like paying the tolls. And there was one day, Chrissy and I were driving down the turnpike. We're driving from here. We're going to Lancaster, and we're supposed to get off at that Ephrata 222 exit there on the turnpike. And we just get into a great conversation. Like, we're just deep in talking and enjoying ourselves. And the next thing you know, I blow by the Ephrata exit. Well, you know, on any other interstate on the face of the earth, that's not a big deal. A mile or two down the road, there's another exit. But no, they're going to charge you money to drive on a road that only has an exit like every 15 to 20 miles. And so we're in this great conversation, but all of a sudden I miss my exit, and we got to go 20 miles down, get off, come 20 miles. It may have not been 20 miles, but it sure felt like it in my heart at the time. In fact, at the time it felt like 100 miles. We got to go all the way down there, turn around, come back. You know, you got to pay the toll. Pay the toll. I don't know what toll I got to pay it, but I got to pay it, but it's there. You got to pay the toll, turn around, come back. Man, I was so infuriated. And the conversation we're having was good, but the best thing at the moment was to pay attention to where I needed to get off of the turnpike. And sometimes we get so engrossed in the good that we miss what might be best. And Jesus, God is calling us to spend time with Him so we can know what's best. And that's what we're trying to do as a church. We do a lot of good in the church. I really believe that we do. And each and every one of you are part of that. But we're trying to figure out, man, what is best? Last point. Jesus continues his journey outward. Jesus continues on his journey outward. Verse 38. And he said to them, this is after Simon said, hey man, people are looking for you. And Jesus said to them, let's go to the neighboring villages so that I may preach there too. This is why I have come. I want you to notice the order that all of this happened. Jesus prayed. Jesus was distracted, but Jesus carried on with his journey. He kind of thwarted the distraction and carried on with his journey. Jesus was proactive in hearing from God, not reactive. We often wait until it's decision time to start praying. We often wait till that moment of crisis comes and then we start praying. We often wait till, oh, I got offered another job. What should I do? And then we start praying. We often wait till we're at a crossroads in our life and then we decide to seek God's direction. We decide to seek discernment from God or from the Bible. But having a firm grasp on God's will and direction for your life comes from having a devotional and prayer life in place before it's decision time. You see, Jesus was doing what he always did. And in the midst of doing that, a distraction came. And because he already had a prayer life, because he was already devoted to the Father, and whatever the Father was telling him to do, it was a no-brainer for him. It wasn't like, oh, I need to go pray about this decision some more to see what to do. No, he already knew what to do because he was in right relationship with God the Father. And so there wasn't that crisis, there wasn't that worry, there wasn't that anxiety, because he was already where he needed to be with God. Second thing about this is that any inward journey should always result in an outward journey. Any inward journey should always result in an outward journey. Because Jesus had prepared inwardly, he knew exactly what to do outwardly. He knew what to say yes to, he knew what to say no to, and he had a sense of purpose and intentionality about both of them. Ellie, you can come back up to play. What good would it have done for my parents to do all the planning for our trip to Pennsylvania? Snacks, check. Toys, check. Triptych, check. Luggage, check. Car gassed up, check. All the kids in the car, check. What if we all got in there, all our stuff was in there, and what if my dad never put the car in drive? We talked about this last week regarding salvation. God doesn't just save us from something, but He saves us to something. Your Christian faith does you no good if it is only yours. It's meant to be shared. It's meant to be on mission. Jesus knew why He came to earth. Do you know why you're here? What's your mission? What's the mission of Watershed Church? How does your mission and Watershed Church's mission meet? How do they join together? Well, we're taking the next few months, and we're looking inwardly. And we're saying, God, what are we doing? This is why every Tuesday morning we fast as a church. Maybe you didn't do that. I don't know if I announce the fasting every Sunday, but every Tuesday morning, our Synergy team, we fast as a church. We fast, we don't eat bread, we skip breakfast, and we spend the morning in prayer. Like, that doesn't mean you have to take off work. That just means you're in a spirit of prayer. You're focused on God. We break the fast. Most of us break the fast at lunchtime. And that's why every Tuesday night we gather to pray. Why? Because we want to know what God's doing. We want to be devoted to God. When it comes decision time, we're going to know where God's leading us. We're not going to have this crisis of belief, and we're not going to have this anxiety and this worry about what's next. What about you in your personal life? What does that look like? If a big decision came across your way today, would you know how to handle it? Would you know how God would want you to handle it? My prayer is that we all get to that point. I'm still growing in that. Like, I'm not there yet. I'm working on getting there. I'm trying to get there. I'm trying to lead this church to that place too, because it's the right way to do it, because it's a lot easier to rely on God than to rely on me. To rely on a pastor, than even to rely on ourselves collectively. It's so much better to rely on God. What is your mission? Let's pray. God, you're amazing. We do love you. Lord, we thank you for the example that Jesus left of introspection, of looking inside of our hearts and our souls and our minds. God, of looking to you for identity, for our faith, because it says you're the author and perfecter of our faith. God, for direction and purpose in our lives. God, I pray that we can end today, we can end tomorrow, God, we can end every day and answer the question why we did what we did today. And I pray that our answer to that question will be because of something that you showed us that we needed to do in our life. God, maybe it's to turn away from a certain sin. God, maybe it's to go outwardly and to be on mission for you. God, maybe there's a million things in between that you're calling us as individuals to do or us as a church to do, God. But whatever it is, I pray that what happens inwardly between you and I and between you and this church, God, I pray that it comes outwardly and it shows the world the love of your Son, Jesus Christ. Change us, God. Give us direction. We look to you. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.